Welcome to Savvy Business, Life Unscripted, with your host, Christina Rivera, where our guests share their wisdom and valuable business tips, empowering our audience to expand their personal potential.
Hi, Amy Herman. Welcome to Savvy Broadcasting, Life Unscripted. I'm so grateful to have you here today. I love the name of your company, but also what you're going to come talk to us about today, which is Fixed, how to perfect the fine art of problem solving. And before we got started here, you told me just a little bit, we discussed how the world really is in need of fine-tuning problem solving, and that sometimes people are like, someone else will handle that. But, sometimes we all have to step up and do our own little part just so we can make the world a better place.
That's absolutely true. Thank you so much for having me on podcast today. I'm really, really happy to be here. And, as we were talking about all the things that are broken, when I started writing this book, we didn't even know what a pandemic was. So it just goes to show, I wanted to give a template for how we can fix problems. We face problems every day. Everything's broken, and it doesn't mean we're going to fall apart. And what I hope to do with this book is give people a template to solve big problems and small problems, from, minor annoyances to life-saving dilemmas. How can we make the world a better place without sounding so Pollyanna? But how can we make the world a better place?
Yeah. So I'm curious, how did you come to creating the Art of Perception seminars in your company? How did that come about?
Well, I took a really, really circuitous route. I am what I like to say, I'm a recovering lawyer. I'm not, once you're a lawyer, you're always in recovery. So I like to say I'm a recovering lawyer and I'm an art historian. And I like to think that I combine the practical aspects of each of those disciplines, legal analysis and visual analysis, about 20 years ago when I created this program. When I left the practice of law, I started working in museum education at a real gem of a museum here in New York called the Frick Collection. And while I was there, I started this program. And the program, it wasn't rocket science and it wasn't my idea. They were doing it up at Yale. The idea was really simple. Let's take medical students out of the hospital, out of a clinical setting, bring them to an art museum, teach them how to look at works of art. So hopefully when they return to the hospital, they'll be better observers of their patients. That was the goal. So with Yale's permission, I started a version of that program here in New York City, and it went really well. But I realized in 2004 that more than just medical students need good observation skills. This really applies to anybody who sees for a living or looks for a living. So I made a cold call to the NYPD, my local police department. Wow. I picked up the phone and I called them and I'm like, I have a great idea. I train medical students to enhance their observation skills, and I think it would be great for police officers. And I was transferred 7 times, and I finally reached someone who heard me. And 6 months later, every captain in the police department had to come through my training, ended up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, and my world exploded, and I started doing it all over the world.
Wow. And that is so amazing, because a lot of people would stop at that first, being transferred to 10 different people, thinking, well, obviously they don't want it. But you saw that there was an actual need, because police officers, the best way they can serve and kind of stop an escalation of a problem is to really be able to observe when issues are starting to arise. Because issues, like my husband's a pilot, and he always says, when you get to a point when you're going to crash, it's a whole bunch of little things that kind of added up to a big thing. So you have to be aware of how things are escalating to catch it so it doesn't turn into a big issue.
That's exactly right. And so much of what I think about problem solving is breaking it down into small, digestible, manageable pieces. So if we can de-escalate a situation early or get to it early before it becomes this albatross around our necks, I believe that no problem is insurmountable. Some are definitely more difficult than others, but if we break them into manageable pieces, I really do think they're solvable. And I use art as the data to do this. It's not threatening. Everybody sees something, and I'll use the F word. It's really fun to look at works of art and think about applying those skills to what you do on the job.
Yeah. And what I like here is just the title of the work you did, Art of Perception. Honestly, sometimes if you just catch something in the nub, it's just you're noticing and having a perception of what's going on and clearly seeing it before it escalates. And exactly how can we do that? Yeah.
That's exactly right. And what happens is we get so caught in linear thinking, point A to point B, that we never think about what's behind us or what's at point B or point C, what's at point D. So by looking at art, I just want to introduce the idea of peripheral vision and looking at things from multiple angles to think if there's a better way to do what we've been doing all along.
Yeah. Now, I'd love for you to help businesses right now? Because I think businesses are struggling and how to fix to keep their wonderful talent, because things were up in the air. A lot of businesses were at the beginning of the year kind of being put out there like if you have 200 or more employees, they should be vaxxed, and then maybe they're having issues with some employees staying on. How do they begin to even bridge issues like this and keep everyone on the same page and not getting on that kind of narrow visual thinking?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the places that I start is, one of the phrases that I've heard through the pandemic that I think is applicable for business owners, and I don't want them to say it, is when people say, well, everyone's in the same boat. No one's in the same boat. No one has ever been in the same boat. What we have been in is in the same storm. And nobody has the same capabilities and the same resources we didn't before the pandemic. And we certainly don't now. So as the storm starts to abate and we start thinking about coming out of this and what the new normal is going to be, we have to have this renewed sense that we're not all in the same boat. We don't all have the same resources. So by thinking about their strengths, their weaknesses, how did things look before the pandemic? How can they look different now? Thinking about people's resources and understanding that we've never been in the same boat, and we're certainly not going to be going forward, is a good place for businesses to start.
Yeah, I love that. And what's very interesting? We had a guy on recently who worked with a tech company. He said it's actually turned into a wonderful opportunity for us because we used to they were in Idaho or something. They said now that things have come about like this and we have more of our workers working remote, we've actually been able to get talent all over the country and in some cases around the world, which we never would have even contemplated going outside of our little region to look for talent because our business was here. But now, because this has happened, this has got us to open our mind up to, hey, we don't just have to get talent here, and vice versa. Employees just don't have to look in their backyard.
That's exactly right. And what it brings to mind for me is a quote from Winston Churchill. He said, never let a good crisis go to waste. And I really believe that. And I think that we are in the midst of a crisis, but to give ourselves the opportunity to say, you know what, we're at this critical juncture. Let's look back at the last 2.5 years and say, well, what worked for us? Let's take a hard look at what didn't work for us. And let's bring some of those silver linings and turn them into gold. Let's look at some of the mistakes that we made and bring them to the fore so they can be part of the solution. It's one of the things I talk about in the book, to look honestly at the mistakes that we've made, the things that have gone wrong, bring them to the forefront, talk about them, and work them into a solution so you don't make them again.
Ooh, I love that. Many years ago, I had written a blog called 101 Mistakes and What I Learned in Business. And basically the whole idea of it was, here's some mistakes I've made in 20 years in corporate America, and here's when I made them, the lessons I learned. And it was great. It was kind of like my own individual log or journal, just to keep track of, okay, here's some things I've done wrong over the years that weren't so great, but here's how I can twist it around and say, here's what I learned from that. Let's not do it again.
Can I give you an art analogy for that? Something that I use in my program all the time. In Japan, when Japanese ceramicists and potters, they make their bowls and their cups and their vases, and it's inevitable that some of them are going to come out broken and asymmetrical and imperfect. And instead of throwing that flawed pottery away, what they do is they put it back together and they fill the cracks in with gold and silver and platinum. And you know what happens?
No.
Each of those pieces becomes more unique and precious than had it been perfect in the first place. And they call this kintsugi. And what I love about kintsugi is not only are the pieces unique and absolutely extraordinarily beautiful, but it honors the struggle. It brings the mistakes to the fore. Everybody can see what went wrong, but how they fixed it, in quotes, by filling it in with gold. So what I say to my business leaders and my CEOs, I know you're not a ceramicist, but how are you practicing kintsugi? How are you fixing what's broken with the resources that you already have?
Yeah. Because every single person has their unique gifts and talents that you've hired onto your crew. How can we all come together and make this a wonderful piece of art here that we're serving the world with? And what I also love is that I had heard people go through different times. I had one gal who was actually really depressed. She was in New York City, like I was at the time, and really depressed because she's cut off from going to a job, and she had no family here and no friends that could visit. So it's very lonely, and I think it was toughest on people who were kind of isolated like that.
Right.
But what was cool is at the end of it, she ended up getting sick and whatever. But through the end of it, she said, it offered me time to self-reflect, because now, when you're on the hamster wheel and you're moving so quick through life, like people had said before the pandemic, I'm doing all these business meetings, I'm going here, there, and the kids are going to all these things. You don't have time to reflect. And sometimes in sad cases, people will get sick, cancer or whatever. And those times end up, in a sense, being a blessing, because it forced them on their buns to have to reflect and go inward and say, okay, what can I take from this that's positive? Not that this is positive, but what can I take from it that's positive that I can use going forward?
I can share a quote with you, another quote that I use in my classes, and it comes from the journalist Frank Bruni. And he was talking about the power of a pause, what a pause can do, because we've had this forced pause during the pandemic. And this is what he said. He said, a pause is when passions cool, civility gets oxygen, and wisdom finds wings.
Ooh, love
Passion's
that.
cool, civility gets oxygen, and wisdom finds wings. It's this idea that, when we actually stop and look and listen, we have this opportunity to take a deep breath and rethink the problems that we're facing. And my hope is that readers of my book will take the template that I've given them in that pause to rethink better solutions to the problems that they're facing, the problems that run the gamut.
Yes. And one thing I carried away, and I've seen, and I had a close friend who had someone commit suicide during this time, is I think you can get caught up in the moment of winter when things are really going horribly, and you cannot sometimes in that moment see the end of it. It just seems like this is going to be an endless struggle, horrible, it's never going to come out. I mean, I don't know why when things are going well you don't feel like this is going to end, but when things are going horribly it feels like there's never going to be an end to this. Do you have anyone who might be listening going through that moment of winter, on how they can begin to open the window and see something different, or a different way to look at things, so that they can get out of this winter and into eventually spring and summer?
Absolutely. I'm going to use my own experience, because I am a very grateful, filled with gratitude cancer survivor. And in 2014, I was diagnosed with very aggressive cancer, and I had to go through a lot of treatments and a lot of surgeries. And I didn't have, like many business owners, I didn't have the luxury of crawling under the covers and saying, you know what, I'm going to come out when this is all over. And so what I did is I literally took it one day at a time. I didn't set deadlines. I celebrated milestones. I had 16 sessions of chemotherapy. After each one, I said to myself, you're one session closer to the end. So when I tell my business clients, set deadlines for yourself, but celebrate accomplishments along the way, set smaller deadlines, so that when you look, you're not looking at this overwhelming, it's dark, it's looming, it's winter. Take small digestible pieces of the problem, accomplish them, celebrate those accomplishments, and keep moving forward. Even if it's an hour at a time, 6 hours at a time, or a day, one chemo session down at a time, I'm still alive. I'm here, my hair came back, and I just took it one problem at a time.
I love that. I love that we can get so tied up in starting something new. Like, say January just hit. Everyone's like, I'm going to do all these resolutions and all this stuff. And it seems so insurmountable that most people just get right off the wagon less than a month later and say, it's just too hard. I had started last year on a kind of health journey because I was going pre-diabetes, and I did want to go there and start injecting. And it felt like, when they said you have to lose like 50, 60 pounds. Oh my gosh, I can't do that. It seems really a big hurdle.
Right.
But now, a year later, 45 pounds down.
Good for you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but it felt, as you know, when you start something new, it feels like, oh my gosh, that's how am I ever going to do this? But I love what you're saying here. It's like one little piece at a time. For me, my trainer and I is like, what can we do this week to make a difference? And so I have chocolate. Okay, instead of eating a whole chocolate bar, we're going to have one little piece in the evening. That's it. So but every also, week she added.
Yep. Yeah. But what you said is so true, that setbacks are going to happen. And we have to recognize those setbacks, and we have to say, you know what? They're not going to break my spirit. They're not going to cause another hurdle. I'm going to have breaks, and I'm going to have setbacks, and I'm going to keep moving forward.
Yeah.
And when people say all eyes on you, it's all of my eyes on me. Nobody else is watching.
Exactly.
And so we have to take them in small pieces, recognize that they're going to be setbacks, but treat them like kintsugi, fill them in with gold and keep moving.
Absolutely. Because you know what? Now that, a year later, people are starting to be like, oh, they're noticing the results. But as you say, it's going to be tough days where you don't want to get up and do what you have to do, run your business, make those sales calls, whatever it is. You made no sales this week, whatever it is. But, get back on that horse, as the term goes, and say, okay, what didn't work last week? Let's, as you say, fill in the holes with some wonderful gold and silver and keep going forward.
That's exactly right. And so I just happen to use art as the vehicle to teach people how to do that. And I hope my readers will be able to take that template from the book Fixed with them.
Now, where can they get a copy of Fixed and maybe come to one of your future seminars, Art of Perception? How can they do that?
Listeners can find me at my website at Artful Perception, ARTFUL, and then the word perception. They can find my book at artfulbooks.com or on Amazon or their local indie bookstore. And I'm on social media at Amy Herman AOP, which stands for Art of Perception, at Amy Herman AOP. I hope people will reach out.
I do too. I hope they get the copy of the book today, because we don't have to feel like all of our problems in our life are insurmountable. They're not. And as we said earlier on our offline chat, that if we all just strive to make our lives better and the world better, it's like a ripple in the pond. It just makes the world a better place.
It absolutely does. And I think even the smallest of efforts can have an immeasurable impact on the greater good. So,
absolutely. Well, Amy Herman, thank you so much for coming to Savvy Broadcasting today. I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Like, subscribe, and share this episode. To listen to more savvy episodes and savvy biz tips, go to www.lifeunscriptedradio.com. To find out about our paid sponsorship opportunities or how to become a guest, email Christina at lifeunscriptedradio.com.